Welcome, weary traveler. Lay down your burdens, still your mind, and drift with me, not into battlefields, not to thrones or kings, but somewhere quieter. Simpler. Farther away than any road you've walked before. Tonight, we return to the forgotten corners of time, to the damp fields, creaking floors, and smoky hearths of the medieval peasantry. To the quiet lives lived under grey skies and the ever-watchful gaze of the local lord. This is not the history of heroes carved into stone or echoed through halls. No. This is the soft, slow, often muddy tale of the people beneath it all, the ones who survived not through glory, but through grit. Let's go back, not to the castles, but to the thatched roofs just beyond them. To the worn paths and rough linen, the scratch of wool against skin, and the smell of turnip soup bubbling over a low fire. This is the story of survival, not loud or bloody, but persistent. The kind that endures when no one is watching. Close your eyes, and imagine. You're waking up on a quiet morning in a village that has no name beyond what the villagers themselves call it. The sun is not up yet, but the rooster has already shouted its warning to the world. You're wrapped in a coarse wool blanket, curled on a bed of straw that crunches when you shift. A wooden shutter cracks open near your feet, and cold air whispers inside. The scent of smoke and damp hay is thick around you. Outside, the ground is soaked. The earth is not quite mud, not quite soil, it's something in between. Soft enough to sink into, but hard enough to bruise your heel if you land wrong. There are chickens in the yard, scratching at old turnip tops. A pig grunts, nosing at a frozen bucket, and somewhere in the distance, a dog begins its morning howl. You don't have a clock. No one does. Time isn't measured in hours, it's in chores, bells, and bellies. You rise, and already your bones creak. You're young, maybe 30, but the years have packed themselves into your joints. You stretch your arms, and your sleeve smells of old grease and wool. You light a stub of candle with yesterday's coals and look around. The cottage is no bigger than a shed, really. 2 rooms if you're lucky. 1 if you're not. A table made from uneven planks. A pot hanging over cold embers. A stool with one leg shorter than the others. The thatch above your head is dotted with small holes that drip during storms. You patched it last week, but the rain always finds a new path in. But none of this surprises you. This is life, and it's been this way since you can remember. The fire is out. You'll need to rebuild it before the little ones wake. You gather dry reeds, arrange them carefully, and breathe on the embers. It takes time. You've done this 1,000 times. The smoke curls, then chokes, then finally gives way to flame. You boil water, toss in a handful of oats. No sugar, no spice. Just warmth. That's all breakfast needs to be. Outside, the village is yawning awake. A cart creaks. A voice curses the stubbornness of a mule. A woman calls for her daughter, and the sound echoes off wooden beams. There are no paved streets. Just paths worn into the earth by centuries of footsteps. Every puddle tells a story. Every rut has its origin. You step outside. The ground sucks at your boots. It has rained, again. It always rains. The air is cold enough to bite but not enough to snow. Your hands are red and rough, and your fingers crack where they bend. There is a rhythm to life here, like the turning of a great, wooden wheel. Each morning is nearly the same as the one before it. Wake. Stoke the fire. Feed the animals. Check the fence. Help with the baking. Walk to the field. And again. And again. But routine is survival. This world does not forgive innovation. It rewards caution. And it forgets quickly. In the distance, the manor sits on its hill like a brooding thought. Its windows dark. Its stones ancient. You don't go there unless called. No one does. That's where the Lord lives. Or, more precisely, that's where the taxes live. The village has perhaps 40 people. Some older, some younger, but all worn into the same shape by the weight of repetition. You know each of them, not their dreams or secrets, but their sounds, their footfalls, the creak of their carts, the way they cough in winter. You know when someone is missing. The baker's boy died last spring. You remember. Everyone remembers. He had a fever and then, nothing. The priest buried him at the edge of the graveyard, near the thorn tree. No one talks about it anymore. But they haven't forgotten. There are joys, too. Quiet ones. The first green shoot in spring. A day with no rain. A loaf that rises just right. A calf born strong. A good song hummed around the fire. These things matter. They are your cathedral. You don't own your land. You rent it from the Lord. But in your heart, the soil knows your hands. Your feet know each stone in the path. This is your world, and it has shaped you. As you walk back toward the cottage, your youngest greets you with a smile missing 3 teeth. You hand them a warm wooden cup of oat porridge and sit near the fire. They ask you, again, if the king will ever visit. You smile. The king. As if he knows your village exists. You say what your parents said to you. No king ever found his way through this much mud. And they laugh. And so the day begins. If you want to understand the daily world of a medieval peasant, start with their feet. Not with their thoughts, their prayers, or even their labor, but with what they stood in. What they walked through. What clung to them from morning to night. Mud. It was the constant companion, the eternal enemy, and sometimes, the only thing reminding you that the earth was still under you. There were no paved roads in your village, not even packed gravel. Just pathways carved by generations of footsteps, heavy carts, and the stubborn hooves of animals. These paths twisted between huts, barns, pigsties, and fenced patches of earth too wet to farm and too dry to be a pond. You'd step outside your home and your boots would sink, not dramatically, not disastrously, but just enough to remind you that nature didn't care about your errands. It pulled at your steps like an old dog tugging at your trousers. You'd lift your foot with effort, only to have the other get stuck. And so you learned to walk with a kind of rhythm, a subtle dance of resistance and release. Now imagine that same mud mixed with what the village couldn't use, spoiled vegetables, animal droppings, broken pottery, and anything not worth saving. The commons was not just a place of community, it was the catch-all space between usefulness and decay. You'd see chickens darting through puddles, pecking at crusts tossed from windows. Pigs rolled in shaded slop pits, caked in yesterday's waste and blissfully indifferent. Dogs lounged in the muck, their tails thumping lazily whenever something moved, a rat, a child, or a breeze. It smelled unforgettable. A stew of manure, damp hay, smoke, rotting cabbage, and something sharp, maybe vinegar, maybe thyme. It clung to your nostrils like a bad thought and followed you indoors. No amount of open windows could chase it off entirely. Still, no one complained. Because complaint was a luxury. In this world, you had 2 choices, adapt or fall behind. The commons was where disputes were settled, or started. Where goats wandered too far, and neighbors argued about who trampled whose carrots. Sometimes you'd see someone standing ankle-deep in mud, arms waving, voice raised, accusing someone of borrowing a hoe and never returning it. Others would glance over, shrug, and return to splitting firewood or gutting fish. There was no central government here. No police. Justice was community-based, and usually loud. If you stole something, everyone knew. If you lied, the village remembered. Gossip here was more efficient than any court. And still, this place, muddy, chaotic, and loud, was the heart of the village. It was where deals were struck, a loaf of bread for a wedge of cheese. A rabbit traded for a wool scarf. Services were exchanged, favors recorded only in memory. No written contracts. Just trust, or something that passed for it. Children played here too, in bare feet. Their laughter bubbled through the morning mist as they chased geese or threw clumps of wet moss at each other. Their games often mirrored adult work, pretending to scythe wheat with sticks, leading imaginary sheep with string, holding fake weddings behind haystacks. You might think, how did they stand it? The mess. The smell. The noise. But remember, they didn't stand it. They didn't endure it. They lived it. The mud wasn't an obstacle, it was the stage. The commons wasn't filth, it was shared ground. This place didn't demand comfort, it demanded participation. And there were small comforts here, hidden in plain view. On warm afternoons, the sun would dry the mud into cracked mosaics beneath your feet. You'd see the outlines of hooves, cart wheels, bare toes, each a record of someone's path. A woman might pause with a basket on her hip, squinting up at the sky and sighing. An old man might lean against a post, chewing a sliver of wood, watching life pass like a slowly turning wheel. At the edge of the commons, near the well, there stood a leaning post where people often gathered. Not for any ceremony or law, just to talk. News from the next village. Whispers of a plague in a distant town. Whether the Lord Steward would visit this week. Whether the miller was watering down flour again. No one trusted the miller. He lived just outside the village, in a slightly better house, with slightly cleaner clothes, and he always smiled too wide. You knew he was skimming grain, but proving it, that was another matter. So you grumbled and paid the toll. Even the mud knew the truth. It wore different boots than yours. Yet, in spite of everything, or maybe because of it, the commons was strangely comforting. It was where everyone could be seen. There were no secrets in the mud. No polished stone to hide behind. Just people. Peasants. Neighbors. Survivors. The same faces, day after day. When the harvest failed, this is where people came to barter their last goods. When a wedding was celebrated, this is where the dancing began. When someone died, the commons grew quiet, and the villagers gathered with bowed heads. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't clean. But it was alive. And in a world where life was hard and often short, that was enough. You returned home with the soles of your boots heavy. You scraped them on the threshold, wiped them on a mat made from woven reeds, and stepped back inside. The fire still crackles. The pot is warm. The children sleep with their mouths open, cheeks red from wind and laughter. You sit down and breathe deep. Yes, the mud is still on your trousers. And it probably always will be. But you made it through another morning. And in this world, that is a victory worth savoring. The sun is rising higher now, just barely cresting the edge of the trees behind the village. A pale gold spills across the rooftops, what rooftops there are, illuminating the dew clinging to straw, mud, and the bent blades of grass that sprout defiantly between footprints. Inside your home, the fire is beginning to wake, flickering with new strength. Your hands are cracked from yesterday's labor, dry in the center, rough at the edges, where calluses form like bark. You stretch, quietly. Today, like every day, starts with the small rituals. The ones no one speaks about but everyone follows. There are no mirrors in your home. If you want to see your face, you catch glimpses in water, maybe in the trough outside, maybe in a bowl before it's used to rinse laundry or feet. Your reflection is murky, always shifting. That's fine. You're not here to be admired. You're here to endure. Your first task, before the animals, before the fields, is hygiene. Not the kind modern minds imagine. There is no peppermint toothpaste, no clean white towel waiting by a tiled sink. No cotton swabs or soaps that smell like lavender. Instead, there is cold water, often still, sometimes with leaves in it, and a rag, and ash. Yes, ash. It scrapes more than it soothes, but it does the job. It cleans. Or, at least, it feels like it does. You wash your face with water, wiping away the night's sweat and smoke. You rub your armpits with ash, your feet with vinegar if you have it. There is no luxury here, only necessity. And in a strange way, it's enough. You comb your hair with fingers. If lice have taken up residence, you scratch. You curse. You pull. A neighbor may give you a sprig of lavender to stuff in your bonnet, not because it works, but because it smells nicer when you sweat. Everyone itches. Everyone smells. And so, in the end, no one minds. Your clothes are not clean. They are not meant to be. But they are dry, and that's a small blessing. A wool tunic, once your father's. Now patched in 4 places. A leather belt, softened with age, cracked like riverbeds in summer. Woolen hose that sag at the knees. A cloak when it rains. Boots when you can find them. Your hands brush against the same wood grain on the door as they do every morning, smoothing it over time. A reminder, you are here. Still breathing. Still standing. And that, too, is a kind of cleanliness. Your children wake shortly after. Sleepy-eyed, hair matted, voices soft from dreams. They fight over the water bowl. One wipes their nose on their sleeve. You nod. That's how it goes. You show them how to rinse their faces, how to scrub behind their ears. These habits are passed down like songs. Not because they're perfect, but because they've worked. Outdoors, the village is stirring in full now. From every doorway, someone emerges with a basin, a cloth, a handful of salt or herbs. You hear the splash of cold water. The slap of hands drying on thighs. The rhythm of repetition. Behind a fence, someone cracks a joke about fleas having a feast. Laughter ripples down the lane. You might think, what's the point? Why wash when you'll be dirty again in an hour? But that's the trick of it, really. This isn't about perfection. It's about starting clean, or as clean as possible, so you can face the day. The village has its own invisible lines of decency. If someone lets themselves go too far, others notice. Not out of disgust, but concern. Illness spreads fast. Dirt invites rats. And rats mean plague. So people try. In their own ways. With their own means. Some hang bundles of herbs above their doors, rosemary, sage, garlic. A ward against illness, or evil, or both. Others bathe once a week in the river, or in barrels behind their homes, covered with cloth for modesty. There are rumors of nobles who bathe in milk. No one in the village has seen it, but the idea itself is enough to spark quiet disbelief and amusement. Imagine wasting food like that. Imagine being so clean you smell like nothing at all. Somehow, that seems unnatural. A bit suspicious. The priest says cleanliness is godliness. But he only bathes at Easter, and no one questions him. There is one woman in the village who prides herself on her homemade soap, a lumpy, yellowish block made from animal fat and ashes. She sells it at the midsummer market. It stings when you use it, but afterward, you feel strangely refreshed. Children chase each other with it like a game. You stink, one shouts. Here, clean up. The other shrieks, dodging behind a fence. Everyone laughs. You remember that game from when you were young. Maybe nothing's changed at all. By midday, the idea of cleanliness fades into the background. Dirt becomes decoration, smudges on your arms, mud streaked up your legs, sweat darkening your collar. Your hands are brown with soil and grease. And that's fine. Because you began the day with water. With ash. With breath. You began the day with intent. And for a peasant, for someone who works the land, who serves the seasons, who bows to no one but nature and time, that is enough. The cleanest thing you'll touch today may be the linen cloth you keep for church. Or the sky itself, brushed clear by wind, pale blue, untouched. You look up at it now, wiping your brow with a sleeve. The clouds drift like boats. The sun rises higher. And you walk on, into the mud, into the work, into another day. In the distance, just above the tree line and behind a low crest of hill, stands the manor house. It isn't a castle. Not the kind with turrets and banners and great stone halls filled with fire and feasting. But to you, and to everyone in the village, it might as well be the throne of God himself. This is where the Lord lives. Or at least where he sleeps when he isn't traveling or waging war or collecting more taxes. His name has weight. His name is on the seal that binds every piece of land, every bushel of grain, every marriage contract and inheritance. Even your home, humble as it is part of his ledger. But you don't see him often. You see his steward, a thin, sharp-nosed man who rides a brown horse and keeps records on rolls of parchment tied in a goat-hide satchel. He comes with a serious face, a wax seal, and a thin stick he taps against his palm when he's irritated. Which is often. He speaks in a tone that demands quiet. Not because he is wise. But because silence is what keeps peasants safe. And so you listen. You nod. You agree. Because living under a lord is like living next to a river that occasionally floods. It may seem calm, predictable, even helpful. But if you don't watch the banks, it can swallow everything you've built. Let's be clear, you are not a slave. Not exactly. You are what they call a serf. You are bound to the land. Which means you belong to your village, and the village belongs to the Lord. You can't just pick up and leave. You can't move to the next town without permission. You can't marry someone outside the manor without approval. But within those boundaries, strange as it sounds, there is a certain kind of freedom. You work the land. And in return, you keep part of what it grows. You raise animals. And though you owe the Lord a portion, you get to keep some for your family. You tend the fields, mend the fences, bake the bread, dig the ditches, and in return, the Lord provides protection. Or at least the idea of it. If bandits come, and they do, the Lord might send men at arms. If a new law is passed by the king, the Lord explains it. If war is declared, the Lord decides who must go fight. Usually, it's not you. You're too poor to carry a sword, and too valuable in the fields to be wasted in battle. So you serve. Quietly. Cautiously. Carefully. The steward arrives once a week to collect taxes. Not in coins, peasants rarely have those, but in goods and labor. He takes 2 sacks of grain. He marks your name. Next week, you'll owe 1 day of work on the Lord's fields, land not yours, but land you must till with the same aching arms and bent back. It's called corvée labor, and everyone does it. You bring your tools. You wear your oldest boots. You dig, you haul, you sweat. No one thanks you. But you do it anyway. Because that is the price of peace. Sometimes, the Lord holds court. Not a grand affair, just a bench set beneath an old elm tree near the manor. Villagers gather when there's a dispute, a stolen chicken, a broken fence, a claim that someone's cow wandered where it shouldn't. The steward listens. The Lord occasionally speaks. Fines are given. Whippings sometimes follow. Justice is swift. But not always fair. You've seen a man punished for taking wood from the wrong part of the forest. Just branches, for fire. But those trees belonged to the Lord. Everything here does. The fields. The stream. The fish. Even the air, some say, when taxed in the form of smoke rights or chimney fees. Still, people endure. They find ways around it. You and your neighbors might pool resources, help each other pay a tax in goods, then trade behind the steward's back. You might forget to mention a newborn goat. You might bake extra loaves and sell them at a market in the next village, where the steward's eyes don't reach. You learn to navigate. Not rebel. Not revolt. Just survive. The Lord is distant, like a storm cloud on the horizon. He may never rain on you. But you prepare, just in case. And yet, there are days when his presence brings something better. When he hosts a feast, some villagers are invited to help. You might serve meat at his table, or sweep the floors of the hall. You might catch a glimpse of fine clothes, gold chalices, the glow of hundreds of candles. You see how different life could be. But those glimpses fade fast. You return home to your dirt floor and straw bed, and the dream drifts away like smoke from a dying fire. Still, the system works, in its own brutal, grinding way. The Lord owns the land. You till it. The Lord keeps the order. You obey it. And through this unspoken contract, generation after generation persists. Some might say that's oppression. Others might call it balance. You call it life. And you make it work. Because you have to. Because this land, though not yours on paper, knows your footsteps. Because the fields remember your hands. Because the morning still comes, and the wheat still grows, and your children still laugh in the dust. And because survival, in the end, is the strongest form of rebellion. If you want to understand medieval life, you must understand taxes. Not the kind that come in envelopes or through phone calls. Not income, property, or VAT. But something far more personal. Tangible. Measured not in numbers but in sacks, days, chickens, or buckets of ale. To be a peasant under a lord was to live under 1,000 small obligations, each one like a thread, thin on its own, but together binding you tight to the land. And yet, peasants were not fools. They may have lacked formal education, but they were masters of the unspoken arts, bartering, sidestepping, and stretching rules until they bent without breaking. Because if the Lord could invent taxes, the people could invent loopholes. Let's begin with what you owe. First, there's the labor tax, a few days a week working not on your own fields, but on the Lord's. This is called corvée. You bring your tools. You do your work. You get no pay. Then there's the grain tax. A portion of every harvest, sometimes a tenth, sometimes more, goes straight to the manor storehouse. This is your tithe. Next. The mill tax. You aren't allowed to grind your own grain on a hand stone anymore, the Lord had that banned years ago. Everyone must use the manor mill. And the miller takes his share. Want to bake bread? That's a baking tax. Want to sell that bread at market? Market toll. Raise pigs? There's a pannage fee, a charge for letting your swine forage in the woods. Have a chimney? Pay the smoke tax. Get married? Marriage fee. Have children? Baptism fee. Die. Burial fee. It seemed, and still seems, that the only thing not taxed was breath. And some say that was simply because no one had found a way to catch it. But here's the truth, while the lords built systems, peasants built workarounds. Take the mill tax, you were required to use the Lord's mill, true. But maybe, just maybe, your neighbor still has a hand mill hidden in the hayloft. So once the steward is gone, you swap your grain for his flour. Quietly. Quickly. Discreetly. You've both saved a toll. You've both gained trust. That's a kind of wealth the Lord can't touch. Then there's the baking tax. The Lord might insist you bake in his oven, for a price. But what if, on a moonless night, you and your cousin dig a fire pit behind the shed, cover it with stones, and bake bread beneath a blanket of smoke? Doesn't taste the same. But it feeds the same. Or let's talk about labor. Say you're expected to give 3 days a week to the Lord's fields. You can't afford that, your own crops are behind. So you trade. You offer a neighbor a chicken to take your place for one day. You cover his work next week. Now you're both still standing. Still fed. Still unpunished. The world bends, if you push gently enough. The steward comes every week. He records everything in his ledger. But he doesn't see everything. He doesn't know that under the hay in your cart, you've tucked 2 wheels of cheese you'll sell in the next village. He doesn't know that your cousin is selling tallow candles in town, labeled as blessed to avoid tax. He doesn't know about the second goat you're hiding in the forest. He can't know everything. Because the village has its own language. Its own rhythms. Its own truths. And while the Lord may rule from a distance, here, in the mud and smoke and laughter, you rule your own corner of survival. Some taxes are ceremonial, like the Harriet, where, upon your death, the Lord can claim your best animal. So you might lend that animal to a friend the moment you fall ill. When the steward arrives, the goat is gone. The next best animal, sickly and lame, is all you have. Is it deceit? Or is it balance? You decide. Then there are festivals, moments when markets open and trade is allowed. These are opportunities. You gather eggs, herbs, small trinkets, and hope for a good spot near the path. You trade, you laugh, you listen to gossip. But mostly, you listen for loopholes. A new steward in the next village. Prices changing at the mill. Rumors of lords going to war and forgetting to collect for a season. All useful. All ammunition. Even in hardship, the peasant mind is sharp. This isn't rebellion. Not truly. There are no swords drawn. No banners raised. No calls to arms. This is something quieter, and perhaps more dangerous. This is adaptation. Every loophole is an act of memory. Of shared history. A reminder that long before the parchment, the seals, and the ledgers, there was the land. And those who knew how to live on it. You pass this knowledge to your children. You teach them which corners of the barn stay warm in winter. Which roots grow even in drought. How to count without using numbers, how to trade without using coin. How to nod and smile when the steward speaks, and how to forget his words the moment his horse turns. And they will do the same. Because loopholes are not just a way to avoid taxes. They're a way to stay human in a system designed to forget your name. And so, as the sun sets and the fields fall into shadow, you sit by the fire and count your quiet victories. 3 loaves saved from the oven. 1 lamb traded off record. A good laugh shared over a borrowed cup of ale. And most of all, the knowledge that tomorrow, you'll do it again. Not because it's easy. But because it's yours. The land, when generous, can make a peasant feel like a king. But when it turns without mercy. You wake up one morning in late summer, and the sky is too still. The wind, when it comes, is dry and crackling. The fields, your fields, are brittle, yellow, almost humming with heat. The turnips look tired. The barley is thin. The cabbages never quite formed their heads. You know what's coming. Famine doesn't arrive like a storm. It doesn't crash through with thunder or announce itself with lightning. No, famine whispers. It shows itself in the small things. A hen that lays fewer eggs. A cow that gives less milk. A neighbor who doesn't wave back, not because he's rude, but because he's worried. The village begins to murmur. Quietly. Carefully. In corners. Rain hasn't come. Last winter's stores were thin. I heard 2 fields failed in the next shire over. You know what that means, food will cost more. Trade will slow. The steward will tighten his demands. And yet, somehow, you'll be expected to pay the same tax. But this isn't your first lean year. And it won't be the last. You've seen hard seasons before, and you've learned, famine doesn't just test your belly. It tests your memory, your planning, your kindness. Months ago, before the harvest even began, you started preparing, not because you were told to, but because your bones told you. Every extra onion was strung and hung high in the rafters to dry. The roots were buried in jars, packed with ash, to keep them cold and mold-free. Salted meats from last spring hang in the chimney smoke, hard as stone but safe from time. Every spoon of butter, every crust of bread saved, just in case. This is the secret life of a peasant, you live in layers of time. Today's bread is baked with thoughts of next February. This week's chores are for next month's peace. And the stories you tell your children are warnings dressed as lullabies. There's no pantry in your cottage, no shelves stocked with shiny tins or sacks with printed labels. But you have a root cellar, a hole dug deep enough to hold winter's weight. Covered in planks, lined with straw. It smells like the breath of the earth. Inside are jars, sacks, pots sealed with wax. Each one a small defiance. Each one a decision made in summer to fight off the wolves of January. You also have knowledge, passed down from your grandmother, who survived the frost year when 3 babies died and the priest went mute from grief. She taught you how to preserve herbs in oil, how to make porridge from acorns if needed, how to boil leather boots to make broth, chewy, yes, but it'll keep a child warm through the night. You hope it never comes to that. But you know what to do if it does. The village, too, has its own kind of wisdom. No one says it aloud, but everyone understands. During famine, generosity becomes survival. Not individual survival. Communal. The baker might share a burnt loaf rather than let it go to waste. The blacksmith might sharpen your tools in exchange for nothing but the promise of stew next week. And you might offer your last apple to the widow whose husband was taken by fever last winter. Because when the worst comes, you'll need her, and everyone else, as much as they'll need you. In famine, pride is a weight you can't carry. So you barter. You share. You hide what must be hidden, and give what you can afford to lose. And if the Lord comes demanding his share, and you have none left to give, you show him your children's eyes. That usually works. If not, there's always the forest. A place of danger, yes, but also refuge. Nettles can be boiled. Mushrooms foraged. Roots dug in silence. You know which berries nourish and which ones kill. The old woman near the well taught you long ago, with fingers stained from testing. And if a deer is found, dead by accident, near the path, well, who's to say who found it first? A famine year isn't just about food. It's about choice. Do you feed yourself or the baby? Do you keep the goat or sell it for flour? Do you risk the Lord's wrath to keep your family breathing? These are questions no noble ever has to ask. But every peasant knows the answers. You prepare also with warmth. Not just food, but fuel, the firewood you've been stacking since midsummer. Dry branches under eaves. Bundles of twigs tied with string. Dung patties dried in the sun. They stink when burned, but they burn all the same. No fire means no food. No warmth. No life. And you've come too far for that. Winter comes anyway, of course. The wind is sharp. The snow falls hard. The path to the well is frozen. The animals grow thin. Your boots crack. Your hands bleed. Your dreams are of green fields and buttered bread. But somehow, you keep going. Because of planning. Because of stories. Because of stubbornness. And because in some small, stubborn corner of your soul, you believe spring will come again. It always has. Winter has now sunk its claws in deep. The ground is iron. The streams are sealed with ice. The trees are stripped, not only of leaves, but of bark, scavenged by desperate hands hoping to boil it into something that might pass for nourishment. And inside your cottage, the silence is different. It's not the silence of rest or peace. It's the silence of hollow stomachs. The baby hasn't cried in 2 days. That's worse than crying. Crying meant energy. Crying meant life. But now the baby simply lies still, mouth slack, skin papery. Your wife doesn't speak unless you speak first. Your son stares at the hearth as if it might flicker a bit stronger just by willpower alone. Your fingers are numb. Not just from cold, but from calculation. Because now, every meal is a math problem. Every crumb, a decision. If you eat the last turnip today, will there be anything left tomorrow? If you share your crust with the boy next door, will your daughter make it to Sunday? You think about the root cellar, nearly empty now. A single jar of pickled cabbage. A wedge of cheese you've sliced into so thinly it's nearly transparent. A clay pot of oats, barely a scoop left. The salted meat is gone. The dried apples were eaten in the second week of snow. The emergency stores, the ones you swore not to touch, have long since been touched. And emptied. And scraped clean. Outside, the animals are dying too. The hens huddle together for warmth, barely laying. The goat coughs when it breathes. You slaughtered the pig last week, earlier than you should have. The meat is smoked now, but it won't last the month. You've begun to see the signs on others as well. Old Marta, who used to hum as she walked, now leans against fences, her lips blue. She hasn't opened her shutters in days. The blacksmith's boy collapsed near the well. His father said it was from cold. But you know hunger when you see it. And then there are the darker signs. You hear whispers of theft. Someone's root cellar was raided, the lock broken, the floor muddy with unfamiliar footprints. A dog was found skinned behind the chapel. No one claimed it. No one asked questions. Because the answers are already known. This is what famine does. It strips away not only weight, but names, and rules, and shame. You start measuring people by how hungry they look, how sharp their cheekbones, how slow their movements, how hollow their eyes. And you wonder, what would I do, if it gets worse? Not if. When. You remember stories told in whispers, the famine of '73, when someone boiled their belt into soup. When graves were opened. When mothers pretended their children were asleep, just to get one more ration of bread. You don't want to believe it. But you've seen the way the baker watches his own sack of flour like it's gold. You've seen people barter their heirlooms, candlesticks, wedding rings, holy books, for a heel of rye. You've even heard the priest mention, in lowered tones, the sins of desperation. And when a priest starts hedging his words, you know something sacred has started to fray. But through it all, somehow, you keep moving. Every morning, you rise. You light a fire with what little fuel you have. You pour hot water over stale bread to soften it, stretch it, pretend it's soup. You whisper to your children that spring is coming. That the snow will melt. That the wheat will grow again. They nod, even if they don't believe you. They want to believe you believe. And in a way, you do. Because you must. Because to let that belief die is to lose more than food. It's to lose the very thing that separates man from beast, not reason, not speech, but hope. You begin to dream more vividly. Always of food. Of fresh butter. Of roasted meat. Of apples so crisp they snap. Sometimes the dreams are so real, you wake licking your fingers. And sometimes, you wake afraid, because the dreams are better than your waking life. But you can't afford to float in dreams too long. There is still work to do. Even in famine. You mend your tools. You check the barn. You walk to the village edge, not to find food, but to be seen. To let others know you're still alive. That your family still stands. Because visibility matters. When someone disappears, people stop looking. When people stop looking, help stops coming. And sometimes, that help is everything. A neighbor might share a loaf. A cousin might invite your son to eat with them. The priest might leave a parcel by your door without a word. These are the gifts of famine, small mercies, unspoken gestures, invisible threads holding the village together. And so the weeks pass. Harder. Colder. But not hopeless. You begin counting signs of change. A trickle of meltwater near the road. A bird call you haven't heard since autumn. A thin shoot of green by the fence post, barely alive, but there. You show it to your daughter. She touches it with reverence, like a relic. And for the first time in weeks, she smiles. You let yourself smile, too. Because though famine is a cruel teacher, it always teaches the same final lesson. Spring comes. Always. You survived the famine. Just barely. Your belt hangs looser. Your cheeks are hollow. Your eyes have seen too much. But you're alive. The snow has melted, the streams run freely again, and in the quiet thaw of spring, life stirs. The hens begin laying again. The goat finds green shoots in the pasture. Children chase each other through puddles, their laughter hesitant but returning. You plant again. You hope again. And then, the coughing begins. At first, it's just the old Marta, who made it through the famine by chewing bark and boiling cabbage water, suddenly takes to her bed. She doesn't get up. A day later, the blacksmith's apprentice, just 16, complains of chills. He's drenched in sweat by nightfall. Then it spreads like fire on dry straw. The coughing grows deeper. Harder. It's not just coughing, it's choking. People don't look sick, they look cursed. Purple blotches bloom beneath their skin, dark and bruise-like. Boils appear, sometimes on the neck, sometimes under the arms, sometimes in places you can't hide. The first funeral happens quietly. The second, with fewer mourners. By the third, the bell doesn't even ring. The priest says it's a punishment. That sin has invited the devil. He swings incense over the sick, but his hands tremble. He wears a cloth over his face now. You've never seen him do that before. You hear the word whispered on the wind, plague. You don't understand what it is. No one truly does. You only know it moves faster than anything you've ever seen. One day someone is splitting wood. 2 days later, they're in a shroud. Your neighbor boards up his house from the inside. He doesn't come out. Someone tries to flee the village, the steward stops them, says it's forbidden. The road is closed. You don't argue. You can't. There's nowhere safe to run anyway. So you stay. And you wait. And you pray. Though your prayers feel thin. One night, your youngest child develops a fever. You do what you can, wet cloths, whispered songs, a carved charm tied with string and hung above the bed. You remember the old ways, placing garlic at the corners of the room, burning rosemary, reciting a rhyme your grandmother taught you. But the fever climbs anyway. And the next morning, the rash appears. You sit by their side, numb. There is no healer, no medicine. Only time. Only chance. You feel helpless, and that's the true sickness of the plague. Not just that it kills, but that it unravels the thread of control. People begin digging graves early. Long, deep trenches. Not because they're planning, but because they know. No one talks of numbers anymore. Only names. Then fewer names. Then silence. Food is left on doorsteps. The village market falls apart. No one dares touch silver. It's said the plague lives in metal. You wrap cloth around your face. You soak it in vinegar. Others do the same. It doesn't help, but it feels like something. And in times like these, something is everything. The church doors are shut. The bell doesn't ring anymore. Even the crows are quiet. You wonder, why us? But the truth is, it's not just your village. Travelers, when they come, tell you that cities are worse. That bodies pile in the streets. That whole neighborhoods vanish in days. That no one is burying the dead anymore. That the living are afraid to speak the names of the lost. One day, you pass the manor house and see the steward outside, scrubbing his hands with sand. The Lord hasn't been seen in weeks. Some say he fled. Others say he's dead inside. And still, the fields need tending. The goats need feeding. The firewood must be gathered. Because the plague may steal your people, but it cannot halt the sun. So you move through your tasks like a ghost. You sleep lightly. You speak less. The air feels heavy. Not just with death, but with the question no one dares ask. Will we be next? Then, slowly, too slowly to believe, it begins to stop. No one dies for a day. Then 2. Then a week. And the silence changes. It no longer feels funereal. It feels cautious. Tense. Like the village is holding its breath. Then a child laughs again, not nervously, but freely. A woman opens her shutters. Someone rings the church bell. One soft toll. Not for mourning. But to remind you, life is still here. You gather with others, not in crowds, but in pairs, in small clusters. You speak names. You cry. You hold hands, even if you're still afraid. You mark the doors of the lost with charcoal. You make lists of who remains. You try to remember what joy feels like. The village is smaller now. Quieter. But not empty. And somehow, in a world touched by death, even the smallest act of living feels holy. You begin again. You always do. The plague has passed, or at least, it has stopped for now. But what it leaves behind is not silence. It's something else. Something strange. You walk the village paths, and it feels emptier. As if the world has been hollowed out. Houses are shuttered permanently. Fences broken but unrepaired. Some homes look as though their owners simply disappeared, stew still in the pot, boots still by the door, dust slowly growing like mold across the corners. You don't speak too loudly. You don't knock on those doors. There's a feeling in the air, one you can't quite name. It's not just mourning. It's fear. And not of the sickness itself anymore. But of what it meant. Of why it happened. Because no one understands it. No one knows what caused the plague. Only that it came. That it killed. That it left. And where knowledge fails, superstition grows. Suddenly, everything has a meaning. A raven circling above a house. A warning. A cracked mirror. A curse. A cat that won't leave your doorstep. A spirit. People start hanging herbs above every door, not just garlic now, but mugwort, angelica, and rue. Some burn lavender each morning. Some wear iron rings. Some carve symbols into their doorframes, ancient ones, older than the church, ones their grandmothers whispered about in darker times. The priest frowns at this. But he says little. He, too, buried half his flock. Even he ties rosemary into his sleeves now. Then come the stories. Of a woman in the next village who didn't get sick because she washed with holy water each morning. Of a boy who survived because his mother drew a circle of ash around his bed. Of a beggar who visited the village right before the first death, and was never seen again. Some say it was a punishment. Others say it was a test. But the most whispered belief of all, the one people don't even admit to themselves, is that something has changed. Not just in the world. But in them. You see it in how people step back from one another, not just out of caution, but out of suspicion. You see it in how offerings are left at the edge of the forest again, bread, salt, milk poured on the roots of old trees. Traditions abandoned generations ago are suddenly remembered. Revived. In quiet corners, people speak of spirits. Of balance being disturbed. Of the dead being angry. The village hedge which, once merely tolerated, is now visited daily. People ask for charms, for blessings, for readings. She takes her payment in food, not coin. Her hut smells of smoke and sage, and her eyes look distant, as if she's always halfway into another world. You visit her, too. Not because you believe. But because belief and desperation often wear the same face. She gives you a stone. Smooth. Cold. Black. She tells you to place it under your child's bed, and the dreams will stop. You don't ask how she knows about the dreams. You just nod. And place the stone. And the dreams do stop. You begin to wonder if the old ways held some truth all along. Not everyone agrees. Some cling to the church tighter than ever. Mass attendance grows, even though the pews are fewer. The priest gives sermons about sin, humility, and repentance. He warns against false beliefs. But even he pauses when a child begins coughing. Because everyone remembers. Because even now, people are still burying the last of the dead. Because the plague may be gone, but the fear is not. Some men say the stars changed. Some women say the wind sounds different now. Children say they see figures in the woods. And sometimes, you believe them. You begin to mark days not just by the sun, but by the feel in the air. A heavy morning. Avoid travel. A red sunrise. Burn herbs. A sudden drop in temperature, even indoors. Whisper a prayer. You never would have done this before. But before is gone. You're someone else now. Everyone is. And you don't say it out loud, but deep inside, you know the truth. The plague didn't just take lives. It changed the rules. And no one is certain what the new rules are yet. So, for now, you follow them all. Just to be safe. You carry garlic in your pocket. You leave coins at the foot of the crossroad. You hang iron over your door. You plant wildflowers in your garden, not just for beauty, but for protection. And at night, when the wind moans and the shadows stretch long across your cottage walls, you tell yourself stories, the old ones, the strange ones, the ones that once frightened you as a child. Because now, those stories feel real. And, strangely, comforting. Because if the world is truly haunted, then perhaps your ancestors never left you. Perhaps they're watching. Perhaps they're helping. And perhaps that, in the wake of such horror, is the most hope you can ask for. Life does not return all at once. It comes in glimmers. A loaf of bread shared between two families who once stopped speaking after a land dispute. A door that stays open during the day. The sound of laughter, cautious at first, then fuller. Your village, once quiet with dread, starts to hum again. Not loudly. Not confidently. But steadily. After the plague and the famine, after the funerals and the whispered superstitions, there is only one direction left, forward. And it starts with the smallest act, a broom. You wake one morning to see your neighbor, old man Bertrand, sweeping the path in front of his cottage. He leans on the handle more than he used to. But he sweeps anyway. Dust rises, sunlight catching in it like gold. It's not much. But it's enough to make you get up, grab your own broom, and do the same. Soon, others join. Children begin carrying buckets to the well again. A woman hangs out fresh linen for the first time in months. You begin to hear the soft rhythm of the loom, someone is weaving again. These are not grand acts. But they are sacred, in their own quiet way. Because every gesture says the same thing, we are still here. The priest, who lost his voice for weeks, finally climbs the church steps one Sunday. His sermon is short. It is not about sin, or fire, or death. It's about seed. How every seed must be buried to grow. How darkness isn't the end, but the beginning of change. People weep. Some laugh. Some simply hold hands. And afterward, no one wants to leave the church. They linger. Not because they're afraid to go, but because it feels good to be together again. The blacksmith, once pale and silent from grief, begins pounding iron again. First, just tools. Then horseshoes. Then nails. Then a new plow blade. The sound echoes through the village like a heartbeat. The baker starts making extra loaves, leaving them on the steps of those too weak to work. A young widow starts a garden near the chapel. Not just vegetables, flowers. Bright ones. Useless, by some standards. But you don't think so. And every day, people bring her seeds. You bring her some, too. The goats are breeding again. The hens are laying more. Even the bees have returned to the hive you thought was dead. And for the first time in a year, your pantry is beginning to look like a place of possibility again, not despair. Still, the land carries memory. There are empty houses that no one claims. Graves that have no names. Tools that rust beside doorways where no one returned. You clean them anyway. Not to forget, but to honor. Because part of recovery is remembering correctly. Not just the pain, but the perseverance. You see it most in the children. They've grown, not just in size, but in understanding. They've helped dig graves, carry buckets, tend firewood. And now they help rebuild. One group gathers stones to rebuild the fence at the village edge. Another mends the path to the well. Some replant herbs near the forest line, not just for medicine, but for memory. One girl begins painting small signs near the doorways of those who passed. Not names. Just flowers. Birds. Symbols of things that meant something to the people who once lived there. You help her. Together, you paint a dove for Marta. A hammer for the blacksmith's boy. A spinning wheel for the old weaver. Each symbol a soft song, sung not with voice, but with brush and color. The Lord eventually returns. His steward arrives first, of course, to assess damage, to count what's missing, to speak of debts and duties. But something has changed. Even he sees it. He doesn't raise his voice. He nods more than usual. He listens. And when the Lord finally appears, thinner, paler, clearly shaken, he too seems quieter. He does not demand. He asks. He promises seeds. Livestock. Coin for repairs. You don't believe all of it. But even the attempt matters. Because the village is no longer just surviving. It's negotiating. You meet as a group now, not just for church, but to speak of land, of water, of work. The decisions are shared, even if not equal. Voices that were once dismissed, women, elders, widows, now speak freely. And others listen. The trauma became a reset. And no one wants to waste it. Even leisure returns. A fiddler plays in the square one evening. A boy juggles stones. Someone starts a game of dice. You bring out a loaf of spiced bread, saved for such a moment. It vanishes in minutes. The laughter rises. And for a moment, you almost forget the plague ever happened. But then you remember, and the remembering doesn't hurt as much. That is healing. Not forgetting. But surviving long enough to remember without breaking. You start dreaming again, too. Not of food. Not of warmth. But of the future. Of fields heavy with grain. Of children who never knew famine. Of days when the bells ring only for weddings and harvests. It may not come. But it might. And might is enough to keep going. It feels strange, at first, to go back to chores. Not because they're hard. But because they're normal. After months of death, hunger, and ghostly silence, even fetching water feels like a kind of ceremony. You carry your buckets to the well like you're carrying holy relics. You nod to the widow passing by. She nods back. No words. Just shared breath. Shared survival. Back home, your hands move almost on their own. You sweep the dirt floor, chase the chickens from the doorway, patch the roof with bundled straw. For the first time in a long time, no one needs a reason to do these things. They just need to be done. And that's comforting. You rise with the sun. You dress slowly, not because you're tired, but because you can. There's time now. The frantic, desperate rush of survival has faded into the patient rhythm of routine. You warm yesterday's porridge. You feed the goat. You check the traps you set along the woodline, a rabbit today, maybe. Then you go to the fields. The earth is kinder this year. Or maybe you're just noticing its softness more. You walk your rows, fingers trailing over tender shoots of barley. You whisper to them, like your father did, like his father before him. You don't know if the plant's here, but you do. And it calms you. Chores come in waves. Morning is for gathering, eggs, herbs, dry branches, gossip from the road. Midday is for tending, weeding, feeding, scraping the grime from the tools you didn't bury deep enough during winter. Evening is for mending, socks, doors, hearts. And all of it, is a kind of prayer. Not to a god. But to life itself. The children adapt fastest. They run barefoot again. They play again, with new games now. Ones that make no sense to adults, but carry pieces of all they've seen. One boy builds grave markers from pebbles. Another girl names her dolls after those who were lost. You don't stop them. You let them process in their own way. That's part of the work too. Every chore is slower now, but more mindful. No task is beneath you. You learn to tan leather. You learn to dry herbs for later months. You trade turnips for clay pots from the neighboring village. Some mornings, you walk the woods just to hear quiet. Not fearful quiet. But peaceful quiet. The kind that fills rather than hollows. Other villagers fall into rhythm too. Bertrand teaches your son to carve handles for tools. The widow near the well shows your daughter how to sew a patch that won't tear. The baker asks you to help build a second oven. Together, you dig the pit, stack the stones, and laugh at how crooked it looks. But it works. And it smells like bread again. Some things return slowly. The village feast, held on the longest day of summer, is smaller than it used to be. But it happens. Torches are lit. Berries are shared. Someone brings a small jug of honey mead, and everyone drinks with reverence. Even the Lord comes down from his manor house. Not dressed in finery, but in plain wool, like the rest of you. He raises his cup and says something kind. You don't remember the words, only that people nodded. And that it didn't feel like an act. There are still reminders, of course. Not everyone has returned to the rhythm. Some still walk with shadows clinging to their heels. Some stay indoors. Some talk to people you can't see. And that's okay. The village understands now. Healing isn't a chore. It's not something you check off before sundown. It's a journey with no deadline. And sometimes, your only job is to sit beside someone and say nothing. Because presence is a task, too. So you keep doing the work. The physical work. The emotional work. The invisible work. You teach your children how to fix a leaky roof. You show them how to save seeds from this year's crop. You teach them how to notice the sky, not just the color, but the feel. And they listen. Because children learn by watching. And you've never worked harder than now. Not to build something new, but to protect what you've rebuilt. And one night, as you tuck the little ones into their straw-stuffed beds, you hear it. Peace. Not silence. But peace. The goat snorts softly. The embers in the hearth pop once, then settle. A cricket chirps outside the wall. The wind moves through the thatch above. You exhale. The chores are done, for now. Tomorrow, they begin again. And you are grateful. It begins with a torch. One flame, carried down the village path by a child wearing a crown of wheat and daisies. Then a second torch. Then a third. Soon the entire path is glowing with small fires, one for every home, every heart that still breathes. This is summer's turning, the day when the sun is highest and the night shortest. An old celebration. Older than the church. Older than the manor house. A time when peasants dance, not out of rebellion or survival, but simply because they can. Last year, no one danced. Last year, the torches were unlit. This year, is different. You watch as neighbors who barely spoke in the cold months gather together. Children dart between feet, cheeks stained with berry juice. A woman sings, her voice shaking at first, then stronger, until even the baker joins in with a drumbeat on an old bucket. You bring out the bread you saved, round, golden, marked with a sunwool pattern on top. It's gone in minutes. The air smells of herbs and meat smoke. Even the goats look festive, garlanded in wildflowers. No one mentions the plague. No one talks of famine. But you see it in how they hold each other just a second longer. How the steward's wife weeps quietly when the first dance begins. How the priest blesses not just the bread and drink, but the laughter itself. The feast is not grand. But it is sacred. Because every bite, every sip, every story told by the fire, they are acts of resistance. Resistance against despair. Against forgetting. Against the dark. And most of all, they are acts of togetherness. You sit with your neighbors in a ring, passing honey mead, retelling stories from before, but also inventing new ones. A young girl performs a puppet play about a heroic hen who saves her village from a giant worm. A man juggles 3 apples until they all fall, and everyone applauds louder for his failure than they would have for success. The priest tells a tale from Scripture. The hedge witch tells one from before Scripture. No one argues. Because tonight, both stories belong. As the fire rises, the dancing begins. Not graceful, but joyful. Feet stomping on dirt, hands raised, breathless spinning until skirts swirl and laughter spills into the starry sky. You watch your children dance, and for a moment, you see not what they survived, but what they might become. The blacksmith brings out a harp, his father's. His fingers falter at first, then find their place. Music fills the gaps between people. Old wounds don't vanish. But they soften. The baker shares a story of her mother's ghost visiting during the plague, not in fear, but to comfort her. No one mocks her. A few even nod. The widow sings a lullaby her husband once hummed while working the fields. She cries through the second verse. 2 others sing with her through the third. Even grief can harmonize. You slip away for a moment, walking the path behind the cottages, just to feel the quiet. And from there, you see it all, the fires glowing in every doorway, the dancing shadows, the figures seated close, heads bent together over shared food and shared memory. Your village, broken, rebuilt, bent by time but not unmade, breathes as one tonight. You smile. And return. Because festivals, in the end, are not for escape. They're for remembrance. They remind you why you keep doing the chores, why you rebuilt the well, why you taught the children to plant again. They remind you what it means to belong. Later, as the fire burns low and people doze on blankets or lean into one another, someone begins to hum. The old song. The one no one claims to have written, but everyone knows. You hum it too. And though you can't see it, you feel it, your ancestors humming with you. The ones who danced under these same stars, centuries before. The ones who will dance long after. You lie on your back, looking up. The stars are impossibly clear. You whisper a thank you, not to anyone in particular. Just to the night. And to the fact that you're still here. Still breathing. Still part of something. Still together. There are no clocks in your cottage. No calendars on your walls. But you know the time better than any noble in their stone tower. Because you live by the rhythm of the world itself. The rustle of the trees, the shifting winds, the call of birds returning or departing, these are your timekeepers. The land is your calendar. And it never lies. You wake not by chime, but by light. The orange stretch of dawn over the hills means it's time to begin. And you don't ask what day it is. You ask. Is the frost gone from the grass? Are the daffodils poking through the hedge? Has the stream thawed? Has the moon turned full? Because these signs tell you everything. And they never forget. The peasant's year is not 12 months of boxes. It is a wheel, turning, always returning to where it began. The year begins not in January, but when the first furrow is cut. That's the true new year, when the earth opens again and says, I am ready. So you dig. You plow. You scatter seeds like prayers. And each act is both ancient and immediate. From Beltane to Lammas, from Samhain to Candlemas, the old names, still whispered, still followed. They mark not just festivals, but real changes in the land. May brings blossoms and the soft buzzing of bees. August brings sweat, calluses, aching backs, and golden sheaves of grain. October brings wind and crows and the long shadows of dusk. December brings stillness. And through it all, the work never stops. You sow when the hedgehogs stir. You harvest when the blackberries ripen. You cut firewood before the geese fly south. Even the animals help keep time. The hens lay less when cold creeps in. The sheep birth in spring, almost to the day, without fail. Your body, too, becomes a kind of calendar. Your joints know when rain is coming. Your scars ache before the first frost. Your stomach rumbles louder in months when food grows scarce. This knowing, this deep, unspoken connection, is not taught in books. It's carved into your hands. Etched into your skin by sun and snow and soil. Even your sleep changes with the seasons. In winter, you sleep longer, not from laziness, but because there's little light, and your body understands that rest is also survival. In summer, you rise before the rooster, work until your skin burns, collapse by moonlight. And through it all, nature offers no apology. Only consistency. She is not kind. Not cruel. She simply is. The noble may command men, build castles, hold court, but he cannot command the rain. He cannot force wheat to grow. You can't either. But you can listen. And that makes all the difference. So you watch the ants, if they build high, it means a wet season. You sniff the air, a sharp smell means snow within a week. You watch the flight of swallows, the bloom of elderflowers, the thickness of the sheep's coat. And you trust it. Because nature does not lie. Your tools reflect this rhythm. Your hoe, your sickle, your wooden rake, they hang where the light hits in different seasons, ready when needed, retired when not. Your clothing shifts too, from light linen in high summer to thick wool and layered cloaks when the nights turn cruel. And still, even when the world sleeps beneath frost, you find signs of life. Mushrooms in the damp woods. A robin on the fence post. Your breath hanging in the air, proof that you're still part of this ancient loop. You don't own the land. Not truly. You're allowed to work it, by the Lord's favor, by tradition, by necessity. But in your heart, you know something deeper. The land owns you. And that's not a curse. It's a covenant. An agreement older than any parchment or seal. You give your back, your time, your sweat. In return, the earth gives food, warmth, rhythm, meaning. It asks for respect. And, sometimes, a sacrifice. You've seen it. A failed harvest. A flood. A fever that follows the damp. But still, you plant again. Because the wheel turns. Because spring always returns. And because a peasant's life is not one of control, but of communion. You do not conquer nature. You live with her. And you listen. Each leaf. Each breeze. Each birdsong. All telling you exactly what you need to know, if only you're willing to hear it. It's easy to think of survival in terms of tools. The plow. The roof. The firewood. The bread. But the most important tool in a medieval peasant's life was each other. Family wasn't just affection. It was function. It was survival. When you were born, you weren't simply someone's child. You were a pair of hands. A future worker. A stitcher. A watcher of goats. A bringer of water. A holder of memory. And in return, you were held. Your grandmother sang lullabies to you while the stew boiled. Your father taught you how to tell if the weather would turn. Your older brother showed you how to mend a fence, even when you were too small to lift the hammer. Learning was never formal, no schoolhouse, no ink. It came in murmurs, glances, shared tasks, and quiet trust. By the age of 5, you knew the names of every herb that grew behind your house. By 7, you knew how to gather kindling without cutting live wood. By 10, you could carry water on both shoulders and not spill a drop. Each family member had their role. The youngest fetched. The middling helped. The eldest often led, unless a grandparent still lived, in which case their words still carried the weight of weather time. But it wasn't only about duties. There was warmth too. After a long day in the fields, you'd sit by the fire together, legs outstretched, bowls in lap, heads nodding. Sometimes there were stories. Sometimes songs. Sometimes just silence, but the kind that makes you feel wrapped in something deeper than wool. If one child cried, the others hushed. If someone got sick, the whole household shifted to care. There was no your problem or my problem. There was only ours. And that extended beyond your door. Kinship wasn't limited to blood. Your neighbors often felt more like family than distant cousins. You shared more than fences. You shared grief. Shared joy. Shared gossip and garlic and goats when needed. When someone gave birth, the whole village knew before the babe took its first breath. When someone died, every fire dimmed a little, even if you hadn't spoken to them in weeks. During plague or famine, you didn't survive alone. You leaned into the web of kinship, thin as spider's silk but strong as rope when tested. People took in orphans without a second thought. Widows were fed without needing to beg. Children passed between cottages like bread, everyone fed them, everyone taught them, everyone loved them a little. Family wasn't perfect. There were quarrels. Brothers argued over land. Sisters fought over husbands. Parents and children sometimes stopped speaking for weeks. But when a storm hit, real or metaphorical, none of that mattered. You found each other again. Because no one else would come. There was no guard. No doctor. No one to cry out to but each other. That dependence bred a certain gentleness. A softness that lived behind hard eyes and weathered skin. You knew your father's footsteps without needing to look. You could feel your mother's hand on your shoulder before it even touched. You could sense when your siblings were hurting without a word. And in the stillness of night, in that quiet little space between the dying embers and sleep, you sometimes whispered things you wouldn't dare say under the sun. Fears. Wishes. Dreams. Because even in a world so full of hard edges, disease, cold, starvation, your family was the soft space. The place where you could curl into something small again, and be held. Marriage wasn't about love in the romantic sense. It was about alliance. Function. Support. But love, real, slow-growing love, often came after. Two people learning to trust. To share. To grieve. To laugh. Your parents never kissed in public. But your mother always put the bigger piece of bread in your father's bowl. And he always fixed the leak above her side of the bed first. That was love. Quiet. Daily. Undeniable. Children were both burden and blessing. They meant more mouths to feed. But also more hands to work, more voices to sing, more chances that your name, your story, your way of planting beats just so, would live on. You buried children, too. It was a pain every peasant knew. Some were too small to name. Some were named, loved, lost anyway. And when it happened, the whole household bent. But didn't break. The others would hold you. Cover the chores. Keep the fire going. Until you could return. Until the grief was just one more guest in the house, quiet, but always there. You made room for it. Just like you made room for laughter. Because the family was a home built out of people. Not timber. Not thatch. But hands. Hearts. Shoulders. You leaned on each other in winter. Shared the harvest in fall. Celebrated the first green shoot of spring together. And at the end of a long life, you hoped to die not alone, but surrounded, not by servants or strangers, but by the very people who'd fetched your water, mended your shoes, shared your sorrows. You would hold their hands. And they would hold yours. And that, more than coin, or land, or title, was the true inheritance. The only one that mattered. If the men of the village are the plow, breaking the earth, tilling the soil, turning the wheel of labor. Then the women are the thread. They're the ones who stitch everything together so it doesn't unravel. From sunrise to moonrise, their hands are never still. They are not just caretakers. They are weavers of order, makers of calm, managers of chaos in a world that refuses to stand still. You wake before your husband most days. Not from duty, but from necessity. The fire must be rekindled. The dough must be kneaded. The infant must be soothed before the rooster even dares to crow. Your feet are bare on the cold floor. You wrap yourself in a shawl still damp from yesterday's washing. And you move, because you must. You measure time by tasks. By how long it takes the porridge to bubble. By the light creeping across the floorboards. By the number of steps from hearth to loom to doorstep and back again. Your children rise one by one, blinking, scratching, stretching limbs that grew in sleep. You don't have time for long cuddles, but you place your palm on each forehead. Check for fever. Kiss the crown of the smallest one's head without them noticing. Then the day begins. Women run the home like a ship crossing dangerous seas. The smallest leak, a spoiled pot, a torn tunic, a forgotten herb, can sink everything. So you mend. You clean. You count the eggs. You barter for salt. You dry wild mint above the window because the baby's cough is worsening again. You don't read, but you remember everything. When the rains usually come. What mixture eased your aunt's aching joints? Which neighbor borrows and never returns? Your hands may be cracked from work, but your mind is sharp. You teach your daughters not just how to churn butter, but how to speak plainly to men who talk too much. You teach your sons to be gentle with the goat and even gentler with their sister's feelings. And in the quiet hours, rare and golden, you sit by the door with a spindle, turning wool into thread. It's slow work. But patient work. Sacred work. Every length of yarn, every repaired tunic, every clean dish passed to a hungry child is a victory against the chaos that always lurks outside. And you don't complain. Not because it's easy, but because complaining takes time, and time is too precious. The village women help each other in an unspoken dance. No formal meetings. No assigned roles. Just understanding. When a birth begins, someone always shows up with warm towels. When a husband falls ill, someone sends stew and willow bark. When your child is too loud, your neighbor gives you a knowing smile, and lets it pass. And what of the children? They are not idle. They're not pampered ornaments. From the moment they can walk, they carry water. Watch the fire. Feed the chickens. Pick out stones from the lentils one by one. Your eldest daughter, just 9, can patch her own dress. Your son, only 6, can tie a decent knot, enough to hold a bucket full of potatoes. You don't scold laziness, you teach. Everything is a lesson. How to wrap herbs so they don't rot. How to keep a candle burning in the wind. How to hear the tone in a neighbor's voice and know what not to say. And the children watch you. They learn more from your movements than your words. They imitate how you stir the pot, how you tie your headscarf, how you press your lips together when the news from the manor is bad. Play and work blur together. A child weaving daisy crowns is also learning the strength of stems. A child making mud pies is learning the feel of soil. Your youngest rocks the cradle while shelling peas. They all grow into usefulness, not out of obligation, but because usefulness means belonging. And belonging means protection. When a child falls sick, the entire household bends around them. When a child asks, "Why does the moon follow us?" you don't dismiss them. You tell them a story, even if you make it up on the spot. Because stories shape memory. And memory shapes identity. Sometimes, when you look at your children sleeping, tangled, sweaty, curled into dreams, your chest aches. Not from fatigue, but from fierce love. You'd walk barefoot into the forest for them. Face hunger. Face plague. Face shame. You already have. And they don't know it. Not yet. But one day, they will. One day, your daughter will hold her own child and understand. One day, your son will lift his sibling from the mud without being asked, and you'll see your own gesture echoed in his hands. This is legacy. Not gold. Not land. But care passed down in quiet gestures. A way of being. A way of surviving. A way of loving, without needing to say the word out loud. Because in this world, words are not the loudest truth. Actions are. And a woman's love, a mother's love, is the most constant, invisible force holding the village together. The strongest structure is not the church. Not the manor. It's the cottage hearth, tended by hands that never stop moving. Even when they tremble. Even when they bleed. Even when no one sees. You wake with the sun, but not because of it. You wake because of the bell. The dull, low clang from the chapel tower, cutting the mist like a shepherd's crook. It doesn't just mark time. It reminds you, God is watching. Every moment of your life, from the first slap of air in your lungs to your last whispered breath, exists under that gaze. And whether that comforts or terrifies you, changes with the seasons. The church is not just a building in your village. It's the center of it. Literally. Spiritually. It's where you are baptized. Where you confess. Where you mourn. Where you kneel. You don't understand the Latin, not really. The priest speaks it fast, like a spell. But you feel it. You feel it in the way he raises his arms. In the smell of incense. In the sound of the choir, shaky but sincere. God, they say, sees all. Even the hidden things. Especially the hidden things. so you do your best. You tithe, even when food is scarce. You cross yourself before meals, before sleep, before long walks into the forest. You whisper prayers into your child's hair when they're feverish. You place a dried sprig of rosemary above the doorway and mark the lintel in ash on Candlemas. Just in case. Because as strong as your faith in the church may be, your faith in the other world is just as deep. And it's not written in scripture. It's felt in your bones. There are spirits in the woods. Not evil, exactly, but watchful. There are old gods under the stones. Not gone, just quiet. There are things that howl at night, and not all of them have bodies. So you hedge your bets. You attend mass. But you also hang iron over the cradle. You listen to the priest. But you also listen to old Mother Eltha, who knows which herbs calm a hex, and which dreams mean death. You bury the stillborn child with a silver coin in its hand. You never thank someone for a newborn's health too loudly, it might attract jealousy. Or worse. You never walk past the standing stone without touching it. No one told you to. But everyone does. Because belief, in your world, isn't a matter of one truth or another. It's a matter of layers. You believe in saints. You believe in curses. You believe the Virgin watches over mothers. You believe in the village well's spirit, who must be appeased with a ribbon in spring. And none of it feels contradictory. Why would it? You don't see the world in pieces. You see it as a weave. God is the loom. But the thread comes from everywhere, from the soil, from dreams, from the wind. Even the priest understands, though he'd never say so. He blesses the fields in spring. He walks the edges of the woods muttering prayers, as if to warn whatever listens that we belong here, too. You've seen him turn pale after delivering last rites to a man who didn't close his eyes. He says it was just a trick of the light. But you saw him clutch his cross harder than usual the next day. Some Sundays, the church is full. Some Sundays, it's not. But the bell always rings. And you always bow your head. Because whether it's God watching, or something older, it's best to be polite. Your children learn the same. They're taught the prayers before they can tie their shoes. They're taught never to whistle at night. They're taught to respect the forest, and the things that move within it. One child sees a woman in white by the river. Another dreams of a man with no face. You listen. You don't dismiss them. You tuck protective herbs into their pillows. You draw a cross and spit behind their ears when they sleep. Because you can't protect them from everything. But you can try. Holy days are more than holy. They're anchors. Feast days. Fasting days. Days when the veil is thin. You bake special bread. You wear your second best tunic. You kneel extra long. And when Samhain comes, you light the fires and leave bread at the crossroads. Just in case the ancestors are walking. You don't want to see them. But if they come, they should be welcomed. Death, after all, is not a stranger in your world. It walks beside you always. You just try not to catch its eye. But even death obeys rules. It doesn't cross salt lines. It respects iron nails in window frames. And it never lingers where bells are ringing. So when the bell tolls for a funeral, you listen. You cover the mirrors. You turn your face from the window. And you whisper, may they find their way. Because what else can you do? Belief is the only thing you can carry without weight. It warms when the cold bites. It calms when the wind howls. It explains when nothing else will. And in a world so full of mystery, it's not the certainty that comforts you. It's the ritual. The rhythm. The idea that even if the world makes no sense, you know what to do. Light a candle. Speak a name. Kiss a forehead. And keep going. Because whether God is watching, or the woods are listening. You were taught to walk with reverence. And you always will. In a world where coin is rare and time is tighter than thread, everything you own must matter. Not just serve a purpose, but hold meaning. A shirt isn't just a shirt. It's your mother's stitching. Your aunt's dyed yarn. The day your sheep was shorn and you held the wool like it was a newborn lamb. Because in your world, you don't just use objects. You carry their story. You wear it. You sleep under it. You pass it down. Clothing is a season's worth of labor made visible. Most of what you wear, you or someone you love made by hand. Your tunic, rough wool, dyed with onion skins to a warm ochre, was spun last autumn, woven in winter, and stitched by firelight with fingers that still ache when the cold sets in. Your wife's apron is patched not because she's careless, but because she's clever, each square a fragment from older lives, older winters, older children. Shoes. Rare. Treasured. Made from thick hide, softened with fat, laced with gut string. Not replaced when torn, repaired. Because everything is too precious to discard. Even buttons. Even belts. Even the ragged cloak you wear in storms, threadbare, but still loyal. The tools of your world are not cheap metals stamped in silence. They are crafted. The wooden spoon in your bowl was carved by your grandfather. The comb by the hearth once belonged to your wife's great-aunt, smoothed now by decades of use and passed silently from one hand to the next. You don't have much. But what you do have, is alive with history. Your table creaks because it remembers. The stool has a tilt from years of shifting under the same familiar weight. Even your roof beam bears the notch you carved during a storm, when you prayed it would hold. Craft is not hobby. It is heritage. Your neighbor's daughter spins thread so fine it could catch wind. The thatcher down the road weaves reeds into roof skins so tight they hum with rain. The blacksmith doesn't just make nails. He makes confidence. Nails that hold walls. Hinges that carry doors. Hooks that suspend kettles full of what little warmth there is in winter. And when someone dies, it's the carpenter who does the final honor, shaping the box, smoothing the corners, whispering a prayer as the lid is closed. That, too, is craft. The children learn early. A girl threads her first needle at 6. A boy carves his first handle at 8, crooked, ugly, but his. You praise it. Because one day, that handle will carry firewood. And what is firewood, if not survival? Even leisure, what little of it exists, is touched by making. A carved whistle. A painted stone. A woven flower crown left on a windowsill. Even love is made visible through objects. A token, a charm on a cord, passed between hands, never spoken of aloud. A smoothed pebble from the stream, held in a pocket during hard days. A bundle of dried lavender, tied with a red thread and hung above the sleeping mat. You don't say, "I love you," often. But you show it with stitches. With carefully mended boots. With shared tools and sharpened knives and the better slice of bread slipped into someone else's bowl. Material life is not about luxury. It is about lasting. That's why you save every scrap. Worn tunics become rags. Rags become stuffing. Stuffing becomes kindling. A broken bowl is patched with lead, sealed with beeswax. You don't ask if it's pretty. You ask if it works. Beauty isn't in the shine. It's in the story. Even color has meaning. A woman in green is ready for courtship. A man with red thread on his sleeve might have healing hands. You don't waste dye. You don't waste anything. You live surrounded by the tactile, textures and tools and textiles with soul. Your hands are always doing, kneading, carding, darning, smoothing, stirring. They know what each material demands. Flax needs soaking and beating. Wool needs cleaning and combing. Leather needs oil. Wood needs patience. Every object becomes an extension of you. And you, of it. Even the walls of your cottage, rough wattle and daub, patched with new mud after every storm, become familiar. You know the soft spot in the floorboards. The knot in the beam shaped like a sleeping lamb. The place where the morning light hits just right, and for a second, everything feels warm. Your world is small. But it is rich. Not in coin. But in craft. In memory made solid. In the quiet satisfaction of holding something in your hands and saying, "We made this." Not alone. But together. With time. With care. With love. And that, in the end, is what the material world truly is. A memory you can touch. You can tell the season from the wind alone. Its bite. Its breath. The way it wraps around your neck like a warning. Because in your world, weather isn't background, it's everything. It decides when you plant. When you harvest. When you marry. When you mourn. And it never asks your opinion. The sky is your master, even more than the Lord on the hill. He may own the land. But the clouds? They own your life. Spring is a promise. But it's also a gamble. You plant early, and frost may burn it all. You wait too long, and the summer heat will scorch it to ash. So you listen. To the birds returning. To the insects waking. To the earth itself, softening underfoot, giving off the wet, dark smell of readiness. Summer is work. Long, sunbent days. Backs slick with sweat. Calluses thickening like bark. You cut hay when the sun is high. You gather herbs at dawn before their oils flee. You move quickly, because every hour of light is a gift. But summer can betray. Too little rain, and the barley curls into itself like a dying child. Too much, and the rot creeps in, black and silent. You watch the clouds like omens. You whisper to the sky, even if you don't think it listens. Autumn is the reckoning. What you have, is what you'll keep. If the granary is full, you breathe easier. If it's not, you start rationing by mid-October. You dry apples. You smoke meat. You salt beans until your tongue forgets sweetness. You count. Always counting. Because you've seen what happens when people run out before the thaw. Winter is the test. Not of strength, but of endurance. It seeps into your bones. Into your roof beams. Into your stomach, gnawing as slowly and patiently as the frost on your doorstep. You wear every layer at once. You huddle close. You tell stories, not just to pass time, but to stay sane. The cold makes people quiet. And when the snow comes, and it always does, the world goes still. So still that even the birds forget to sing. But you prepare. Because survival in a peasant's life isn't just about reacting, it's about planning for pain. You don't hope for good weather. You assume it will turn. So you store food in ways your great-grandmother taught. You bury cabbages in straw pits. You hang onions and garlic from rafters. You save fat from every beast you butcher. You turn bones into broth, scraps into stew, rot into compost. Nothing is wasted. Even rainwater has value. You save it in barrels for the dry months, use it to wash, to cool, to bless the doorway. You don't wash clothes in running streams, not because you're lazy, but because you know better. Streams are fickle. They flood. They poison. They vanish. You respect them like you'd respect a stranger with a knife. Firewood isn't chopped in December, it's chopped in July. And stacked high. Because you'll burn more than you expect. You always do. You know how to seal windows with rags soaked in tallow. How to block the wind's path through the thatch. How to tell, by the way the smoke clings to the ceiling, if snow is coming. Animals know, too. You watch them. If the goats won't leave the pen, neither should you. If the crows fly low, storm's on its way. If the cat stares at the door all night, well, maybe check the roof. And still, despite all preparation, nature surprises. A sudden hailstorm in May. A warm winter that wakes the pests early. A flood that drowns the seeds you trusted to grow. So you build redundancy into your life. You plant extra, knowing some won't survive. You keep dried nettle and bark tea, medicine when nothing else can be found. You teach the children to expect hardship. Not in cruelty, but in honesty. Because expecting the worst is what lets you survive it. You laugh when the sun comes out. But you never forget the year it didn't. Everyone remembers 1315. Or maybe it was 1321. Doesn't matter, they blur together in the memory of mud, rot, and the stench of too many funerals. That's the thing about peasant survival. It's not just physical. It's mental. It's looking at the gray sky and saying, we'll find a way. Even when you don't quite believe it. You wrap hope in rituals. In warm broth. In the planting of just one more row. In the sharing of food with a neighbor who has less. Because helping them now might mean they help you later. No one survives alone. The land is unpredictable. The sky even more so. But people? When you prepare together, share together, watch the skies together, you can endure. You don't fight the seasons. You adapt to them. You move with them. You let your life grow like a vine on their frame, bending when the wind howls, curling when the sun burns. But never snapping. Because every peasant knows the truth. You don't beat nature. You outlast it. Life is heavy. The days are long. The work is endless. But even in the mud and hunger and cold, you find room to laugh. You have to. Without joy, the body bends faster, the spirit cracks sooner. And peasants, for all the weight they carry, are masters of making joy from scraps. A feast isn't always grand. Sometimes it's just barley bread, a wedge of soft cheese, and the last of the pickled onions. But when shared around a fire, with stories pouring as freely as ale, it feels like royalty. You don't wait for noble invitations. You make your own reasons to celebrate. The harvest is in. Feast. A child's come of age. Feast. The first frost held off a week longer than expected. Feast anyway. These moments are rare. Sacred. More than food. They are permission to be alive. Music is the heartbeat of these nights. Not formal. Not practiced. Just a reed pipe, maybe a drum, maybe nothing more than clapping and stomping and singing out of tune. You don't need perfection. You need participation. The old men hum in the corners. The children spin until they collapse in a heap of giggles. Your neighbor pulls you into a circle dance, and your knees protest, but your heart doesn't. Laughter is medicine. And in these moments, the aches of the year fall away like old bark. Even the priest softens on feast days. He might warn against drunkenness, but he won't stop you from drinking. He might caution against dancing, but his foot taps beneath his robes all the same. There's ale, always watered down, always a little sour, but it warms the chest. There's bread, fresh, fluffy, glazed with egg if you're lucky. Sometimes, if the hunt was kind or the manner generous, there's meat. A chicken, a rabbit, even pork on rare, golden occasions. You eat slow. Not out of manners, out of reverence. Because tomorrow, it might be turnip soup again. But tonight? Tonight you feast. You share stories. And not just the ones from church or court. You tell the real stories. Of the man who tricked the reeve into working his field. Of the girl who danced with a spirit in the woods and came back with flowers in her shoes. Of the time the cow escaped and ended up in the alehouse. You exaggerate. You laugh. You interrupt each other. And it doesn't matter. Because for once, no one's hurrying to sow, to reap, to fetch, to carry. You just sit. And that, more than anything, is luxury. Even in the hardest years, the plague years, the famine years, you still find ways to escape. Not physically. But spiritually. A carved game board in the dirt. A riddle whispered from mother to child as they peel roots. A flower tucked behind the ear just to feel lovely for a moment. Even gossip is a kind of escape. Did you hear what the miller said to the baker? Did you see the steward trip on his own robe? You chuckle. You whisper. You make fun of your own misery, because it's the only thing that doesn't own you. Festivals are the grandest escape. May Day. Candlemas. Lammas. Saints' Days. You decorate your doors with flowers. You tie bells to your wrists. You compete in foot races, wrestling matches, even who can eat the most in a minute. For those few hours, everyone is equal. The poorest girl becomes the May Queen. The quiet boy with crooked teeth wins the tug-of-war. The old woman who limps from gout dances better than the Lord's own cousin. Because celebration is a leveler. And joy belongs to everyone. Even the animals join in. Cows get garlands. Horses get brushed until they shine. The dogs bark louder, sensing the shift in mood, the release. And always, as the sun sets, the fire is lit. Big enough to see from the hills. Big enough to forget, just for a night, that winter's coming. You sit close. You let your shoulders touch your neighbor's. You watch sparks rise into the dark and imagine your worries lifting with them. And maybe, just maybe, you feel free. Not forever. But for now. Because escape isn't about leaving your life. It's about reclaiming it, even for a moment. In laughter. In food. In song. In each other. You return to work the next morning. Of course you do. The field doesn't wait. The children still need feeding. The pig broke the fence again. But your step is lighter. Your heart is less heavy. Because you remembered, if only for a little while, that you are not just a worker. Not just a subject. Not just a name in a ledger. You are a human being. And humans? They sing. They dance. They feast. Even when the world tells them not to. Especially then. You may not know their names. No scrolls record them. No statues bear their faces. No crowns ever rested on their brows. But the peasants, the quiet majority, are the reason the world still stands. Their legacy is not in conquest. Not in castles. But in continuance. When the kingdoms fell. When the lords changed hands. When the great men of history lost their heads or their battles or their thrones. The peasants kept living. Kept sowing. Kept lighting fires and mending shoes and singing lullabies in candlelight. Because survival, when done with dignity, is revolutionary. And their wisdom? It never died. It lingers in the soil. In the rhythms of rural life that persist even now. In the way we still preserve food. Still gather for feasts when the harvest comes in. Still pass down recipes, proverbs, stories, not because they're written, but because they're remembered. Peasant knowledge was never flashy. It was passed from hand to hand, not podium to podium. How to read the sky. How to soothe a cough with honey and thyme. How to build a roof that doesn't leak. How to raise a child with love and structure and patience, even when there's no time, no food, no future in sight. That knowledge built civilizations. And yet, no one asked them what they thought. What they feared. What they dreamed of. History was written about them, not by them. But they still spoke, just not in words. They spoke in their work. In their endurance. In the way they walked into the fields each morning, even after burying a child the night before. In the way they carved meaning into objects, into rituals, into fleeting, beautiful moments between the storms. You want to understand what strength really is? Don't look to generals. Look to the woman who wakes every day before the sun to feed 6 children and a blind goat, and still finds time to laugh. You want to see loyalty? Don't read oaths. Watch the boy who gives up his only cloak so his sister can sleep warm. You want to learn resilience? Look at the man who has no land, no rights, no riches, and still finds joy in a plum tree blooming too early. These people, bent by labor, weathered by time, ignored by history, they shaped everything. They built the roads the knights rode on. They raised the wheat that fed the kings. They tended the fire that warmed the scholar writing his great works. And they did it all, without applause. Without hope of reward. Without belief that anyone beyond their village would remember them. But they didn't need to be remembered by name. Because their values live on. In the hands of every maker. In the hearts of every mother. In the laughter of children running through a field after rain. Even now, you carry their legacy. When you cook from scratch. When you fix something instead of throwing it away. When you offer kindness to someone not because it profits you, but because it's right. You are doing what they did. Continuing. Caring. Holding the world together at the seams. Their tools have changed. Their homes, too. But their spirit? Unbroken. Unyielding. Unforgettable, if you look closely enough. So next time you walk through a patch of wildflowers. Or feel the ache of honest work in your bones. Or sit quietly with loved ones, firelight dancing across the walls. Remember them. The peasants. The quiet keepers of time. The invisible builders of history. Not boring. Not primitive. But wise. Steady. Essential. Their lives may have been hard. But their hearts, full of ritual, rhythm, and love, are the hidden roots of everything we stand on today. And though the records may not name them, we do. With every story told. With every seed planted. With every flame kept alive in the dark. We remember.